In this tutorial, we're going to explore a technique to help us address images with extreme contrast or high dynamic range. This can especially be problematic anytime a subject or talent is underexposed and the background or other objects in the frame are overexposed or blown out. The big challenge in all this is how we can lower the exposure of the background without making our talent or subject even darker, and vice versa. How can we bring up the exposure on our subject without making the background brighter? In Premiere Pro, the technique I want to share with you is what I call HDR grading, which stands for high dynamic range. This is not to be confused with the actual HDR formats that allow content to be acquired and displayed with super whites and luma levels above 100 IRE. So in a nutshell, what we want to do here is reduce the dynamic range of this image to make it fit within the limits of Rec. 709. We'll do that by bringing up the exposure on our talent and lowering the exposure on the background behind him. We're going to achieve this by using a luma key to isolate and raise just the exposure of our subject, then lower the exposure of the background separately. We'll then finish by applying a color correction to bring contrast back into the image. By the way, you'll want to perform this technique as part of the base correction stage because we're resolving a technical issue, and any corrections or grades made after this will be on top of this foundation. Let's set our white balance using the color picker in the basic corrections tab. I also want to bring up the shadows a little. Then lower the black levels to right about there. To select the underexposed region of this image, which is our talent, we'll open up the HSL secondary tab. Let's turn off the isolation sliders for the hue and saturation so we can just go after luma. We'll begin isolating the underexposed regions by expanding the luma range. You can do this by dragging this triangle on the top. I also want to point out that the highlight feature activates itself whenever you make any adjustments with the isolation sliders. You can also just turn it on or off by clicking this box here. There are different ways to view your key in this drop-down menu. We can change the view to color and black, white and black, or leave it at the default setting of color and gray. It's a good idea to add some softening to the key by dragging the triangle on the bottom like so. We can also refine our key by increasing the denoise slider and by adding a slight blur to the edges. Now with our talent selected, let's turn off the highlight view and use the HSL secondary color wheels below to bring up the highlights, the midtones. We'll slightly lower the shadows, and then pull back on the contrast. Okay, next we'll add another instance of the Lumetri color effect to our clip and follow the same steps to isolate and adjust our background. We're doing it this way because with Lumetri, you can only use one key or HSL secondary per effect layer. Let's turn off the isolation sliders for the hue and saturation, turn on the highlight view, and begin expanding the slider to key the background. Let's increase the denoise slider, turn off the highlight view, and use the HSL color wheels to lower the midtones and the shadows. Let's take a look at the before and after. That's looking pretty good so far. I'm going to add one last instance of the Lumetri color effect to perform a basic correction so that we can add contrast back into the image. Using the curves tool, I'll bring down the shadows and create a slight S-curve. Let's see the before and after. Huge difference. Now our talent stands out in the frame. I think you can agree that this is a great technique that will help you to correct some of the more challenging shots where you're faced with high levels of contrast or dynamic range. I hope this has been helpful, and I'm making this next shot available in the exercise file so that you can practice this technique with. Thanks for watching.